That's a sick burn after I just said that I like drinking salty water earlier in the episode, but I get what you're saying. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Bible Geeks podcast. This is episode 220. I'm Brian Sheely.
I'm Ryan Joy.
And thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. Yet again, we are at the final episode in our Bible Geeks AV Club for The Chosen, Season 1, Episode 8.
The Chosen, Season 1, Episode 8, I and He.
This is where it starts to get really cool. And again, I don't know how we really folded in these episodes of The Chosen alongside all of the evangelism conversations that have been happening. But every time I turn around, I just feel like these fit so perfectly together.
Oh, it fits so well. The pictures of Jesus calling disciples and making disciples who are going to make disciples, the way that the gospel and the identity of Jesus spreads and changes lives. This is what it's all about. And so I guess it makes sense. We're probably not going to get away from the theme of evangelism in these episodes, as it's so central to the stories of the Gospels. But we're going to start here with an icebreaker, just a lighthearted question that has nothing to do with very much, except you'll see how it loosely ties in with the episode. So, Brian, besides water, what drink do you want when you're really thirsty?
I don't know why we start the episodes like this, but I really enjoy it. So I don't care.
Me too.
It's all dumb, but I see what you're doing here with this water conversation from the episode. It has a lot to do with water and wells and being thirsty. And you know what? If I'm really thirsty, I've actually been craving salt a lot lately. You know, I'm not like a big soda drinker or anything like that. But man, if I've got this drink mix that I love, it's called Element, and I add it to water, it's water with stuff in it. It's like electrolytes and magnesium and a little bit of flavor, not very much sugar at all, but it is so good. I love it, especially when I'm sweaty and it's hot outside. It sort of just recharges my batteries, so to speak. So salty water, that's what I like to drink. What about you?
I love it. Yeah. We do the same thing. We use this thing called Ultima, which is an electrolyte drink. But I would say some days you can't beat a really good homemade lemonade.
Ooh.
Like, actually buy a bunch of lemons and go home and juice them. And that on a hot day is pretty perfect. And it does have, some probably has a lot of the electrolytes and stuff, but also a lot of sugar.
Yeah. Oh, it's all about the sugar for sure. But when life gives you lemons, definitely make lemonade. I appreciate that answer. Let's get into our first actual segment here on the conversation. And that is something that Jesus said in Matthew chapter 9, verses 10 to 13, where Jesus is reclining at table in a house. And there's a bunch of tax collectors, a bunch of sinners, and he was eating with them, him and his disciples. The Pharisees see this, and obviously if you've seen the episode of The Chosen, you know why we're talking about this, but Jesus is eating with the tax collectors and sinners, and the Pharisees do not like that. They start not just approaching Jesus, but they go the end around and they talk to the disciples. Hey, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus catches wind of it, obviously, and says probably the most famous and impactful phrase, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." Drop the mic, Jesus. Boom. There is the smackdown for sure. What do you learn from Jesus' words here in this great dinner feast scene?
Oh, it is a smackdown. I mean, the go and learn what this means. Go and learn is like what you say to your disciples, and he's like pointing them to the scriptures and saying, you don't understand this thing that you think you're the experts on. You are the students that need to go and learn this. It is a mic drop. But, like throughout this episode, from the feast at Matthew's house, the conversation with a Samaritan sinner, this episode centers all around Jesus' intimate interactions with problematic people. We still have to check ourselves. I still have to check myself as his disciple, not to apologize and like rationalize, surely we're not meant to bring wicked people into our inner circle.
No,
I mean, that doesn't, the way that we have taken 1 Corinthians 15:33, the evil companions, let's put that in its context and notice what it's actually saying there. But we have taken it and made it like we are as if the Pharisees, we're totally separating ourselves from those that need the gospel, that need to catch this contagious holiness, as we talked about last time. So unlike Jesus, we're separating ourselves, and it's messy out there. Mm-hmm. There's things that, we are aware that we can't condone it. We can't participate in it. Jesus doesn't condone or participate in the kinds of things that this Samaritan woman has done. We're mindful of all of that, but there's this sense that Jesus is bringing people into his trusted friendship group. He's treating them as if they're his people, and it is scandalous. It is shocking to the Pharisees, and I think in some ways to us. Like, it still is like, really? You don't bring people to your table, especially in that culture, and eat with them and act like they're your people. You don't go and stand at a well and talk to a Samaritan woman who has done these things if you're in that culture, unless you are saying, this is part of my mission here. This is what I'm here to do. And I see their humanity, and I see that they were meant for more. He sees this woman's purpose and place in God's family if she gets to know him, and he lovingly makes time for this extended exchange. One of the longest conversations we see Jesus have with anybody. And so, he's not here to call the righteous but sinners. I need to remember that that's part of my job too. I'm here to go to the sick and bring them this message, knowing, remember what we've been saying all season. I think the first episode of the season we talked about what is evangelism, but one beggar telling another beggar where he can find bread. And I'm not so far away from that. And I need Jesus. They need Jesus. I need to be willing to interact in that way.
That's such a powerful connection, because we get on the Pharisees for that, like, oh, the Gentile cooties, right? But like we're the same way. We can build the same walls. We can have the same kind of prejudices. We can develop the same kinds of aversion to being around unholy people. And that's a problem. If we're going to follow Jesus, we've got to be, as a fisherman, out there doing the work, getting stinky with the fish, right? Like, that's just a helpful reminder to check ourselves and make sure we haven't built those walls unnecessarily. Because, man, when he says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, that is such a powerful throwback to Hosea, when in Hosea 6, verse 6, he says, for I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. It is absolutely not to minimize the importance of sacrifice, because God clearly called people to offer sacrifices. But unless we see the reason behind it all, we're missing the whole focus of the work. We're missing what the work is all about. And the work is about people. It is actually the same thing that Jesus referenced in Matthew 12, when he's walking through and his disciples are picking the heads of grain and eating them on the Sabbath day. And the Pharisees have a fit about it. At the end of that, in verse 7 of Matthew 12, he says, and if you had known what this means, another like mic drop moment right there. He's like, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. You would have not condemned the guiltless. He brings the same point up there to them, basically saying, you are missing the point. And am I missing the point? Have I missed the point? Is really, I think, what you were saying there. It just reframes everything about our conversations, everything about our life. What is the point of evangelism if not about other people? What is the point about my life in general as a disciple if not about showing mercy to other people? And that's the point that Jesus is getting people to see, is if your life is not about other people and serving them and helping them, you've missed the point.
That's it.
That's it.
That's your mic drop. Your mic drop.
Right, that was my mic
it's not
drop.
about people, you missed the point.
All right.
That's good.
Let's get into our second segment here on the episode, and that is Here's the Story.
Here's the story.
So we're going to tell the story here of The Chosen Season 1, Episode 8, called I Am He, and where are we that has led us up to this final episode in the season.
Man, we're building here. Nicodemus is still in conflict about, do I want to follow Jesus or not? But Matthew has committed himself. That last episode at the end, he is not only following Jesus, but Jesus has invited himself and his friends into Matthew's home for a party, which was just delighted Matthew because he hasn't. Who wants to be at my house? Nobody comes to my house. And so now he's going to be hosting him, and this whole entourage of disciples he has these days, all these men and women, Mary, Simon, Andrew, James, all these different people. And so you've seen the movement slowly growing kind of on the down low, but you're waiting for this next move. There's something more. They're still just in town, and it's coming in this episode. What's next?
So
right?
The story of episode 8 really starts out with a throwback to the Old Testament, which, by the way, I just love how these episodes start with something, throwing back to the Old Testament, like the one with the bronze serpent and Moses.
Totally.
It's so cool that he goes back to Jacob and Jacob's well. And it's just funny to think about the conversation Jacob is having about this well and what's going on. He talks about how God broke his hip once. God's invisible most of the time, but one time he broke my hip. And that's a throwback to Genesis 32, and Jacob wrestles with God. They're out in the middle of a field at a well, and this well would obviously be later on very close to a Samaritan city. And so that's an important detail we'll learn about here shortly. But the point of Jacob's well is going to be quickly made a connection to later when Jesus has a conversation with an important Samaritan woman.
Yeah, and we're going to end the episode with that conversation. Before we get there, we pick up with Jesus and the disciples, like I said, at Matthew's dinner party. And some Pharisees, as we just talked about in Matthew 9, over here, people inside Matthew's place come to chide Jesus and the others for associating with such people. For, what did you say, stinking like the fish over here.
Yeah, pretty
with
much.
Such unsavory pasts like Matthew and Mary. I can't even put in my mouth the things that happen in the red district that she was in. And Jesus gives the words that we read earlier. I came for sinners. Go learn what Hosea meant. God wants mercy.
And that then transitions us to Nicodemus. The scene quickly flips. We've been following him around the entire season, and this is a conversation between him and his wife. You can see Nicodemus is really struggling here, having a hard time about what he wants to do, whether he wants to follow Jesus or not. He knows he's had this intimate conversation with the king, but is he going to be willing to put himself out there? I think we know the answer to that, but Caiaphas is brought up as part of this conversation. And, the high priest here, Caiaphas, the one who at Jesus' crucifixion played a big part in that. And they're going to celebrate the Shabbat. And so Nicodemus is going to give the blessing over the table. And they're sort of preparing for that when Shmuel comes on the scene, and they talk about how Jesus is calling himself the Son of Man. And they throw back to Daniel 7, where that language is being used. And there's this ban put in place about religious gatherings, and people are looking for Jesus. And you can just see that Nicodemus is in the middle of some of these things, but he doesn't want to be. You can just see that struggle happening.
Yeah, he's stuck. You feel for him, but you're rooting for him. There's some heartbreaking moments here coming up. But then we shift to Jesus healing Simon's mother-in-law. Simon's wife, Eden, has been tending to her sick mom in the background, maybe a couple episodes now. Simon noted that I'm the only one that's married. He's struggling with what is this going to be? He's thinking I'm going to go and earn a little money to leave with Eden and her mom. Jesus then is talking to Eden, and we really haven't seen them interacting, but she needs to know she's part of his plan too. It's not just like, I'm taking Simon, you're on your own, goodbye. It says, you were the first person to notice what I see in Simon. And he tells her, Simon can't make sacrifices that aren't yours also. You guys are one flesh. And he goes and he does this work of healing in her mother, and she immediately gets up, and just like in the story, she says, no one move. I'll be right back with some drinks.
Exactly.
She's dying to now she's serving them. And so
Typical.
That kind of prepares the way for Simon to soon leave.
Yeah, and the whole idea of leaving is important here because they are heading out. And we know, going back from the Gospels, that they're heading out because there's a lot of questions about all the work that's going on and how, Jesus and his disciples are baptizing more people than John. But, when you actually get back to this episode, like they're just going out on a journey. They're heading out into the world, out into Samaria to go teach. And I find it interesting that Matthew leaves his dog behind. That is a really touching moment for me. I wept like a baby. The thought of leaving your dog behind is just, I can't even imagine. But this is the kind of picture I have with Jesus' disciples. They're traveling. Like this is what they're going to be doing. And this is the beginning of that journey. And so Jesus wanted to visit Samaria. Obviously, the disciples are not very happy about that. There's a very special reason, though, to go there. And they don't yet understand that. But I love in this story here how Jesus starts to get into a political conversation with them about the history between the Jews and the Samaritans and like their long-standing beef with each other. It's kind of cool how Jesus is able to like talk through just like the real life modern day issues about what's going on. Like, hey, quit viewing them as the enemy, right? Like Jesus has a different view of them as he's trying to get his disciples to share that same view. So they take off and they leave, and then Jesus eventually meets this amazing woman.
Yeah, he sends the disciples on. He's going to hang out by himself here at this well. They're going to get some food, and the woman comes up to him, and it's the heat of the day. He asks her for a drink. He asks her, why is she coming at this time instead of when the other women come and, when it's not so hot? He asks a bunch of questions, as we've been talking about in our evangelism series. He engages with her. I guess next he gets into analogy land, as we would call it, and he starts taking this idea of water and talks about living water that when you drink it, you're never thirsty anymore. And he tells her soon she'll be able to worship anywhere if she worships in spirit and truth. Of course, that's part of the conflict with the Samaritans and the Jews. They say you have to worship, in the temple. There's a particular place. Jesus kind of wants her to get past this idea that there's going to be this holy geography at some point. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter where you are. You worship God in spirit and truth. And she says something like, until the Messiah comes, I'm not going to trust anybody. He's going to explain it all. And Jesus says, I am he. And he tells her, I haven't been telling people this, but you're somebody I'm going to tell this to. And as he starts to tell her the story of her marriages, her checkered romantic past, he gives names and he, gives all kinds of details. And then she runs off in faith, excited. I'm going to tell everybody. This man told me everything I ever did. And that's the disciples come back. And there's a kind of a cool moment when Simon is like, you told her? We can tell people now it's happening. And he like hugs Jesus. And so it's a cool moment that like, okay, we're at the point of unveiling some truths here that we weren't ready to really let out into the public before.
I like how this episode really is sort of giving you the disciples' viewpoint of things. And you have to imagine they are super confused about what comes next and like they've never been out on the road with Jesus before. And when they actually go out, it's kind of a confusing time. Like they've got a lot of things to work through. So this is a good episode, especially to close out the series with season 1. So let's get into our next segment here. After we have told the story, let's get into our scripture du jour.
What is the soup du jour?
It's the soup of the day.
That sounds good. I'll have that.
So we're going to root ourselves back in the book of John in chapter 4, verses 1 through 30. And if you are tired of hearing us talk about the Samaritan woman, well, just buckle up. We're going to talk about the Samaritan woman some more.
Oh, man, it's so good. And yeah, so we see him show up here. And a lot of that scene is pretty faithful. I mean, there's details, of course, added to it that aren't in John's text, but there is a lot that we're just pulling out. But man, you see the story and then you want to walk away and go sit somewhere in your chair and drink a cup of tea and think about it for a while. And there's a lot of depth to this.
So much depth. And really, this is only going to scratch the surface as we're sort of pulling out some insights that we got from this text again after reading it one more time. In the context of all the conversations we've been having, as I go back and read the story of the Samaritan woman, it really just reminds me how Jesus is able to read the room and start where people are. Like in the last episode, how we talked about Jesus meeting fishermen, and then he uses the connection between catching men, like being a fisher of men. Now Jesus is talking to a thirsty woman who's out there to get water about living water. And so if you just read the scriptures and you just kind of come across these things, it's like, oh yeah, of course, Jesus talks to fishermen about fishing and this woman at the well about water. But like, how skillful is Jesus? Obviously, he's the master teacher. We're learning from him. But how skillful is he at just diving into a deep conversation wherever he is? Like, in light of all of our square one discussions coming up, it really makes me appreciate his nimble approach. Like thinking about reading the room and just responding to people where they are. He's able to talk about the political and religious differences without it becoming a huge roadblock. And so much of the conversation that Jesus has with her is easily a model for me. But I guess my big insight here is just how much Jesus cares enough to blow past all the obstacles that would have kept them from talking to each other. And this fits so perfectly in Jesus' ultimate mission to heal people and reach out to them where they are. Jesus is willing to do the work, not to prepare a 153-point PowerPoint sermon, and give it to somebody in all the details, but to have these conversations with people, meeting them where they are, reading the room, and just investing in people in the way that he is doing here with this woman. A woman who he probably shouldn't have been talking to if it just a random Jewish man would have been traveling around by himself. A woman who probably because of her nationality, most of the Jews wouldn't have even talked to anyway. But the fact that Jesus blows past all of that and then just approaches her where she is. So much of what Jesus does is masterful here in the example. And I love the lesson that I get from that. Meeting people where they are and being nimble, being flexible in where we start the conversation, but always leading it to where Jesus is, always leading it, pointing to the King and why we need him so badly.
Yeah, that was a good summary of what he does and how he's working in this conversation. I mean, he creates these pivot moments where he's just dropping those truths, like you were saying, breadcrumbs. Like, if you knew, you would ask me and I'd give you living water, which wasn't in itself that was just a term. That was an idiom that they would use for like spring water. But Jesus obviously means something more, and he starts to unpack that. And that's where this just gets so profound to me, and he really deepens this metaphor of living water. We started out talking about being thirsty, but he says here, whoever drinks of this water, you won't be thirsty again. And what a powerful idea. Of course, not just talking about her not having to go to the well again in the heat of the day, but water that becomes within us a spring of water welling up to eternal life. Not just a longer life. Eternal means not just a quantitative difference, but a qualitative difference, another kind of life. And a couple chapters later in John 7, he's going to pick up this theme again and say, if anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. And then John adds parenthetically, now this he said about the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive. So both of these passages just speak of this inner sourcing from God of a different kind of life, a life from God, a life from the Spirit of God. What Jesus gives us satisfies like nothing else can. You're not gonna be thirsty in the way that so much of the world is just dying of thirst. It's like you're drinking salt water or something, and you just, everything you drink makes you more thirsty because it's not the satisfying drink that you were made to run your body on. And in the same way, you're not drinking what your spirit and your soul and your inner life was meant to be satisfied by, which is ultimately the Lord himself and him with you and leading you and showing you the way of life. And so ultimately all of this in the way we're thinking about it and where we are right now just keeps bringing me back to the importance of sharing this water with others.
That's a sick burn after I just said that I like drinking salty water earlier in the episode, but I get what you're saying.
I mean, you're not going to the ocean, right? And just drinking from the Pacific.
I know what you're talking about, though. I really appreciate that Jesus gets to the deeper meaning of satisfaction here. It kind of just folds right into what I'm thinking about with the Square One series coming up. How in the first conversation, it's really going to be like, why is life so unsatisfying? Why do people search for meaning in life and not find it? What is the purpose of life? Kind of that Ecclesiastes style search, right? And then you get to the point where you're like, here's Jesus who satisfies everything that we could ever have wanted and more. And really that's how Jesus approaches this woman. I can give you something that will make you never thirst again. You will never, ever be looking for anything else after you find me. And what a just beautiful picture to offer somebody who is thirsty. Like, here, I've got a cup of water.
Yeah, the bottomless well of living water.
Not salty at all.
Not salty. It's just so easy for me to forget what it's like without the living water. I just need to constantly remember that I have something that other people need. And like that we're not in the same reality. I am living in a totally different way of being in fellowship with God than so many around me. And, you know, obviously they have to choose it, but I have this job to say, come and drink the water of life without cost.
All right. So we've been talking about The Chosen, Season 1, Episode 8. Let us reach out, and as we zoom out, have a question a little bit about the whole season that we've just gotten done with.
Reach out and touch someone.
So what moment, Ryan, from Season 1 has impacted you the most, and what kind of sticks with you as you look back on this whole Chosen series, Season 1, now that we finally finished Season 1? We've got a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. Well, I think there's a moment like this in every episode where Jesus shows up. You know, it's like the big reveal of Jesus. Not that he isn't in maybe the episode earlier, but he connects with someone in a new way, a deeper way. He makes himself seen by them. And you're like seeing it again, and then you just want to cry and get the goosebumps and everything. And the one that sticks with me the most is the first time, just because that, you know, it's just a powerful moment. He comes to Mary, he heals her. She gets something about who he is immediately in that powerful exchange between them. She is such a wonderful character. You know, she's just well acted. You really want her to be saved, and you see how desperate and how lost, and then Jesus just, you talked about brokenness, and you see her brokenness and you see Jesus like piecing her back together, just all in a moment, and it's really cool.
I think that's one of the most impactful for me. Really, it's all those times where Jesus just shows up, and in the actor's portrayal here, clearly, you know, where he's able to look, and with just the presence that he brings to the scene, it really reminds you that Jesus had a presence. Like, he really did. As you read through the scriptures, it's clear that Jesus showed up and things changed. And obviously there's so many moments, but one of the most impactful moments was in episode 6, where he heals the leper. And that was just one of those moments where you've got all the disciples around. Like, Jesus has an audience, and that Egyptian woman that's there who sees these things as well, the leprous man comes up, and everyone's like running for the hills because they don't want anything to do with this man. And the shock on their face versus the compassion of Jesus and the look that he's able to give this man, meeting this man's needs, healing him. And just like, what a beautiful scene as they are both embracing, and he's healing him and the man's realizing what's going on. It's obviously a dramatization, and The Chosen as a series has done this so well. But it really reminds you that Jesus made huge differences in people's lives, not only in their physical condition, but most especially in their spiritual condition. And, you know, this whole segment is called Reach Out, but I think what Jesus does for broken people and the way that he reaches out to them is just one of the coolest things that we see in this series. So anytime I'm willing to open up and follow Jesus in his example to reach out to other people, it's just a great reminder to focus on that, to focus on what I can do for other people and touching people's lives in sort of that same way.
There's a lot to take from this. I mean, really, I don't know. I hope people like this thing we're doing. I know some people...
I don't care. I don't care if they like it. I like it. I like The Chosen. I like talking about The Chosen. It's all good. I appreciate it.
It is a really rewatchable series. I'm finding, like, I want to, as soon as I watch an episode, I want to go and like, hey, grab like my wife or grab my kids or grab some other people and watch it together, do watch parties. It is really, really well done. So I'm excited to have completed something because we're so far behind.
I think we know how the story ends, though.
That's true.
At least I hope
I'm sure everybody is beyond where we are if you're watching it along, but it'll be cool to keep moving forward and have these all collected together somewhere on a page on our website, just these conversations about this, and it's been fun for me.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Bible Geeks podcast. You can find us on our website at BibleGeeks.fm. You can find show notes for this episode in your podcast player or at BibleGeeks.fm/220. You can also follow along with our upcoming Square One guided study over at BibleGeeks.fm/Square One. That is where we're starting that on the next episode. We're really excited for that. Please tune in. Let people know about this upcoming series. We would really appreciate that. And until the next conversation, may the Lord bless you and keep you.
Shalom.